Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, let's get ready to mumble.
She had walls, and she was bulldozing them all by herself. To my future husband, if you're listening to this, I might be saying shit that you weren't expecting.
Hello, hello, hello. I'm Suswana.
I am Paul.
Are you ready to mumble?
I'm yeah, yes. I'm
Okay.
mumbling.
How do you feel about mumble rap?
Mumble rap. Actually, you know what? I feel like all the all the criticism around mumble rap is probably the same criticism they had around gangster rap. Same thing, right? Same stuff they had around like crunk. And you know what I mean? It's just the same. It's just either old heads who are hating on like hip hop from young folks.
Yeah.
Or it's, some hidden white supremacy happening where they're like, oh, I don't even like it. It's not real music. You know what I mean? But I think like some artists are incredibly gifted. And, the lyrics, even though they may seem simplistic, even when, and this reminds me a lot when Southern rap was really making its heyday back in the early 2000s, there's so much, in terms of language, so much complexity that it seems simplistic if you're an outsider, but when you're actually hearing and understanding what the lyrics are saying and in the conjunction with the music and the rhythm and everything else, I think it's fucking fantastic.
I agree.
Yeah. But not all of them. I think just,
Well, not everything is good.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like,
But not everything is bad either.
Ooh, it's always a complexity of gray.
Yes.
Indeed.
Because we are also complex creatures who try to have monogamous relationships.
Try. Keyword. Like, come on. Oh, yeah, let's get into it. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah. On episode 2 with Josh and I talked about how love is fluid and, we can love multiple people and also just that different people hold different purposes in our lives.
Ooh.
And I think with you, I've seen you be in a pretty long-term relationship. I would love to know just like how have you gotten to that point and, what are some of the missteps that we've had along the way?
Well, that's real. The person that I was dating, we broke up like a year ago, and we actually are like, it's actually better. Like, it was on a little bit of a rocky road when we were together. And I think like for me, like, yeah, it comes down to honesty and patience and, swallowing your pride in certain times and saying, you know what, I need to like actually force myself to listen. And I'm really good at that, at that. But I think what I had to learn, at least in this past relationship, because, we're always going to be learning. For me, I had to learn assertiveness and like, what am I willing to put up with and what am I not? Yeah, I think just in terms of like drawing boundaries and being willing to let go of like a relationship that brought me a lot of joy, but a lot of other things that came along with it that I felt like wasn't necessary for me in order to be in a relationship. You know what I mean? But I forgot what your question was. So
my question was that y'all had been together for a while.
Yes. Wow. Yes. That came from That came from a lot of patience. And also just like, I think, the day-to-day of being in a long-term relationship, it's not always sweeping someone off the feet. It's those day-to-day moments of like teamwork and having not just fun, but just like a good, I don't know how to describe this, a good type of teamwork that's fun. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's really what it's about. I think, when people try to rush into things or try to make it so that every day has to be magical, I think that misses the point. And, there's always these studies that always float around that say like, hey, the person that you end up being with isn't necessarily the one where you're like, you have the super high highs, because that often goes to super low lows. It's actually better to have like, what my dad would say is this, right? Like a 70 as opposed to always 100 that goes down to a 0. And that's kind of what makes it work.
Yeah.
So I think like treating it like a long distance run as opposed to a sprint is good. And that's a ridiculous metaphor. It should be more concrete. I think, you want to be friends with your partner. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really what works. Yeah.
And I think that's the part that some people forget.
Yeah.
Is, and it was interesting. It was actually with one of my exes. We had like fallen in love really fast, and when we broke up, and it didn't last very long. And I think it was partly because of what he said after we broke up, which he was like, it's interesting, we're not actually friends. And I was like,
yeah, it hurts. Yeah.
like,
God.
Oh shit. And I had to like really think about like, what did he mean by that?
Yeah.
And, and then understand that like, oh yeah, like I don't think we were actually, trying to be there for each other in friendly ways.
Wow. Wait, tell me more about that. That's like a real,
We shared our lives with each other in terms of like what was happening and everything.
Yeah.
But like, we didn't really hang out. Like, we couldn't just hang out.
Yeah.
Like, it always had to be something.
Yeah.
It
had to be like an event or whatever, right? Yeah. That's, and, it's one of the hardest things or biggest moments of growth for me was realizing that of like, it doesn't have to always be, this, I was really back in the day, I was really into these grand gestures of love, right? So like I remember the one person I was dating when we met, right? Oh, I did that all the time, right? I remember like for their birthday, I carried a piece of furniture because they didn't have anything to put their TV on. So they had their TV literally like Shoshana, their TV was on like an office chair.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I was like, what's going on? And they were getting paid. They just were not an interior decorator. And me, my bisexual self, I was like, yes, I'm gonna upgrade you, honey. Don't worry, right? Like so I found this great like piece of furniture, like I can't remember where, but I walked like a mile and a half. I was dead broke in the moment. And I didn't have a bike or anything, so I walked a mile and a half just so I can carry it to their birthday party for their birthday or whatever. And like, I think a lot of times it sets up a certain expectation.
Did they appreciate that?
Not so much, right?
Was that their love language though?
It was in a way, and yet I think it was, but it wasn't the right caliber, if that makes any sense, right? So like, they would appreciate, the mindfulness and like acts of love or whatever. But, for them, it's like, well, why didn't you just take a cab or, like, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of like that. I think I had certain expectations.
It was almost like you were suffering to be loved.
Yes. And I felt like back then that was like the ultimate gesture. I went through so much just to do this. Do you know what I'm saying? As opposed to, there's other ways.
Let's just sit on this couch.
Yeah. Or like, hey, I know you love this show. Like, we can like watch that. Like that actually, I feel like to them specifically, that was actually a bigger gesture than, the blah, blah, which I think that's a real thing. It's sometimes a red flag, but not the worst red flag. Do you know what I'm saying? When you feel like, oh, I have to perform or there has to be something there, or else it's not working. Yeah. Because then that means it's not really working, right? Like we're just kind of distracting ourselves with a diversion as opposed to being with the person themselves. Yeah.
No, I've 100% have sometimes had to struggle with the concept of, okay, and I've been called out on this, of like it's actually somebody we know. It was actually just a friendship. It wasn't even something that we were trying to make romantic, but they like called me out one day and were like, hey, I think you have this idea of who I should be, and your reactions to me are based off of that idea and not on like who I actually am. Ooh. And so like, do you want to be friends with me or the idea? And I was like, yeah. Again, I'm a toxic man, y'all.
Oh, a toxic manual? What?
I said I'm a toxic man, y'all.
Oh, okay. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. I had no idea that I wasn't conscious that that's what I was doing. Yeah. Until they pointed it out, and I was like, no, you're right. That is what's happening here.
Oh, fuck.
But I was like, no, I want to be friends with you, the person. And so then I had to like organize my expectations.
Yeah.
And now we're like the best of friends.
Yeah.
So
That's real. That's like accepting someone where they are, or like approaching them where they are as opposed to where you want them to be. I think you're always going to have to do that, right? Like whether or not that's enough for you to maintain a romantic relationship is always up to you. But that type of like truthfulness to yourself is both like a hard pill to swallow, but also a liberating thing, right? Like, we're still friends, or we're still like, together or lovers, despite me not liking this one aspect or whatever, Gosh, I could even speak to like friendships wise, like, oh God, one of my friends, they're one of the most loyal and sweet people I know. And one of the most caring and empathetic people I know. Like, this is why we're so fucking close. They're also the most like unreliable, right? Like, and just all over the place and just like blah, 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 blah.
yeah.
But that's what makes it so fucking fun to hang out with them and be with them. And like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm always like, I gotta do this, and I'm scatterbrained, but I'm always business oriented.
Yeah.
And for them, they're like, here's the best way to have fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like, here's a crazy idea that we can do for this.
Yeah. Which is, I think, where I come from when I say that different people hold different purposes in your life.
Yeah.
And why, to me, it's irrational to think that one partner can meet all of your needs.
Talk about it.
Because that person is a person.
Yeah. One individual.
And so you have to appreciate that person for who they are, but that doesn't mean that you have to ignore your other needs. And so if there's somebody else who can meet that need of yours, and as long as everything is honest and open and transparent and like it's respectful, right, then I don't think that there should be any shame involved there.
I think when you remove the shame and the there's like shame and judgment that comes from even trying to broach like the subject, but once you cross that barrier, there's such a level of like liberation and freedom that you have, and it gives you a level of comfort too, right? Like, I can actually have my needs met, and I do not have to hold myself or suffer myself to these certain strictures that are pretty much arbitrary, right? Like, I think that's something that I always found to be like comforting in polyamorous relationships and in polycules.
Polyamory, or ethical non-monogamy, whatever you want to call it. Because for me, I also view it as like hierarchical monogamy for me.
Where
it's like,
same.
I have a primary partner. I think polyamory and love being fluid and being queer and anti-racism is all hand in hand.
It's true.
Because it's liberating.
And also, I mean, I can add in, there's like this, I can't remember if it's Code 13, but it's the colonial sodomy laws that are basically exported from Great Britain during the 1700s and 1800s. They placed like in South Asia, in Africa, and like other parts of the world that still exist today, but it's not a lot of times the indigenous or the original like culture, right? Most of these non-Western places had created certain types of social structures that allowed for this, but it was seen as like heathens or sodomy, blah, blah. And I think getting back to that truthfulness of like where we're from and also connecting, it unearths certain truths that we kind of hide ourselves from in Western society, right?
Yeah.
So, like in to reach on the one point of hierarchical, like that's how I often feel. And like I found that it pulls you together in a certain way that it allows for you to be a better person because you're able to confront certain situations or feelings that you may have in a way that isn't confrontational or shamed or like anxiety ridden. Do you know what I mean? Like I remember I was dating someone in Kenya when I was there, and we were in a polyamorous relationship, and it led to a certain amount of growth to me in terms of discussing my big thing is always I'm a people pleaser, right? It kind of right like, and it works hand in hand with me like having to discover this assertiveness I had to have in like in all my relationships and stuff, and my growth and romantically. What that specific relationship kind of helped me grow into was being able to be upfront about my shortcomings or my failures, and in a way that is less about me profusely apologizing, but for me creating viable solutions and conveying what I'm going to do and following that up and holding myself accountable to that partner. And like it's one thing to like not sleep with another person. It's another thing to say that from now on I have to let you know like what I feel about this one aspect that I didn't like, right? In a way that's still kind and generous and still empathetic but still assertive. And that's a hard fucking thing to do.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it's a hard muscle to flex, but it's so fucking like necessary, right? Like it flowed into everything else I did in life, and I found myself having these conversations and approaching it in a way that I would have never imagined I would have had I not been able to grow in that way, if it makes any sense,
Yeah. No, I mean, I've certainly tried to be in multiple monogamous relationships.
Oh yeah, same. Yeah.
And every time I was like, what am I doing?
Oh God. Yo.
And it wasn't that like I didn't want to be committed or that I don't want to be in a relationship. Like I do. I actually very much enjoy a relationship dynamic and a house dynamic.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was like, but I also love these other people too.
Right? Yo, I would always be racked with guilt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? And like I said, like the nature of it, and not every polyamorous relationship is the same, but the ones that I've been in, it basically pulled away that guilt and kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Like it basically like, I was able to acknowledge more of myself, right? Like instead of being like, no, I'm not looking, or no, I'm not, you know what I'm saying? Like, no. It was more like, okay, well, what do I find attractive about this? And, why do I need this right now in my life? I think it was great. And you know what? It reminds me of something that I think, okay, so this is also a part of the guilt thing too, but also part of the learning and growing. Part of that guilt was like, well, for me, I want to raise like a family, right? I want kids, and I do like want a partner or like multiple partners, but I want to be able to like raise a family with someone. I think that's fucking great, and it's kind of like what I intuitively want. There's a certain type of guilt of like, well, if I have these feelings and if I don't get rid of them, then I'll never have a family, right? As opposed to kind of really crossing that line and saying, you know what, instead of me preventing myself from even daydreaming or thinking about that, why don't I actually try to imagine what would that be like if I'm in a polycule and raising kids? Like, there's oftentimes like this thing of like, well, what will children think? And the older I've gotten, right, I'm like, well, kids will understand something if you talk to them about it. If you actually are open and honest about these things, they will be way more accepting and understanding than, keeping it a secret until they're 18. Wow. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like, I'm a late bloomer when it came like for coming out and everything. And that was part of it too, was, how am I going to raise a child and what do I say? And like, me being non-binary, I'm like, oh God, like, how do I explain this? Boom. But once I was out, a lot of people came forward and we connected, and I saw how like non-binary parents were raising their kids, and they picked it up fucking quickly as shit, right? Like, and even a few of my friends are in like E&Ms, like ethically non-monogamous relationships, and seeing them raise their children, it kind of, I would have never gotten to that point of like enlightenment or just like, my eyes being opened of, well, this is possible. What the fuck was I afraid of? Yeah. Had I not taken that first step of not like pre-qualifying myself or policing myself too much. Yeah.
None of this is new.
Right.
This way of living is not new.
Not at all. Centuries old. Yeah.
It's just been, these are just ideas that have been stuffed down our throat. In order to uphold white capitalism. Yeah. And that's how we're going to end this podcast.
Indeed. Great.
Rate, comment, subscribe wherever you listen. Peace.